will you please welcome Michael Hayman.
Thank you, Nick. Thanks a lot. Cheers. Thank you. Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for coming this evening. And I'm here to sell books, so you have to excuse me for that. Now it's great to see some of my old teachers here that still remember me from 1988 when I left Millfield, and I hadn't got the foggiest idea what I was going to do. In fact, I think neither did Mr. Woods and others have an idea what I was going to do. But here I am, 30 odd years later, and a bit grayer, but with a story to tell, I think, in terms of the world in which you guys are going out into. And it's that world that I really want to talk about this evening, in terms of this book that I've written, Mission. And the whole idea about it is really I want to talk about the mission in you guys, because this is the world in which you're coming out into. The highlights of people's lives were very established career choices, like the law, like accountancy. And of course, what we've now found is that we're living in a world where entrepreneurship is becoming increasingly a part of people's lifestyles, either because during part of their lives they will start up a business, increasingly the case that is an everyday occurrence. You might have a normal job and still have your own business. So being an entrepreneur is something that more and more of us will have. But it's also because it's become the rock star choice. It's what everybody wants to do. People want their own freedom. They want their own individuality. They want their own chance to make a difference in the world. And this is the book that we have written, Mission. We interviewed 35 of the world's leading entrepreneurs to really look inside about what makes them tick, what gets them to break through. And John Mackey was one of 35 that we interviewed, but we also interviewed people like Joe Gebbia, the founder of Airbnb. We interviewed a whole range of these leaders from both the UK, the States, and around the world. And we launched this book in early July, so you have got an exclusive preview this evening. In fact, the front cover is pretty new to me as well, actually. So we're right off the we're going with it, and a lot of people have given it their sort of blessing. Even the Duke of York, who has talked about the difference that mission makes in business. And what we found when we looked at the world of business and the businesses that tend to break through. So there are lots of businesses that make money and they don't need to have purpose, they don't need to have mission. But what we found was that for those that do, is that people tend to like them, people tend to want to work with them or shop with them or buy shares from them. And what we found was that there was a basic equation about successful businesses. And it was that mission plus campaigning equals momentum. So what I mean by that is this, is that purpose matters. Purpose for people matters. Purpose for companies matters. That is what mission is about. Your ability to define what you do. If you can add to that the ability to get out there and tell your story, to campaign with it, to actually make sure that your voice is heard, guess what? You get something in your life which is really valuable, which is momentum, movement in your career, movement in your business. Momentum really matters. And Conrad Hilton, who was the founder of Hilton Hotels, I mean, he used to say that successful people are defined by movement. They tend to keep going. That's the thing that seems to be unique about them, is that momentum is an important part of what carries them forward. And when you look at the story of Apple versus Microsoft 15, 20 years ago, what you saw was that Apple was a much smaller company at that point, but its momentum was off the scale because people liked it. People believed in what Steve Jobs stood for. So that momentum is going to be a really important part in your life. And the reason why is because life is speeding up. Now, I'd like to introduce you to Dora. This is my dog. She's a Welsh Terrier. She's a very beautiful Welsh Terrier, but I don't want to just show you that photograph for the sake of it. I want to show you that photograph because there is a basic point, which is that in the world in which you are about to enter, the working world in which you're about to enter, is that you're entering a world which we call in the book dog years. And what dog years are is this, is that every modern year, every new year is worth 7 old ones. So if you're a dog, you live every year is like 7 human years. But this is going to be your career. And if you look at everything from the landscape of London over the last 5 years, look at it from 2010, look at it to 2015, all those buildings, changed beyond belief of any past generation. Look at it in terms of technology. Look at it in terms of the life in which you are entering. That world is speeding up absolutely massively. And the thing is that it's not big companies that are driving that change. If you look at the net new employers, if you look at the net wealth creators, these tend to be small companies. So Nesta, which is a fantastic enterprise research agency, talks about the vital 6%. And the reason why it talks about the vital 6% is because these are the 54%, these are the companies that create 54% of all net new employment. And they're small companies. And what's more, they're young companies. They don't tend to be companies that are 20, 30, 50, 100 years old. They tend to be under 10 years in terms of the profile of those companies. And that's why when you look at a general election that's just gone by and you look at suddenly the focus on business in that general election, when you look at something like David Cameron talking about the doers and the grafters, is that he's really talking about the entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurs have become this hero class in Britain. And I can talk about the stuff that I've done with Cameron and Number 10 perhaps in the Q&A, but what I would say at this stage is that this isn't just about this country. Look at Obama, look at the whole focus on small business and the focus on the entrepreneur as being the way forward. And the reason why is because it creates guys like him. I don't know if you know this guy, he's called Nick Delosio. When he was 17, he made £19 million with a business called Summerly, which he sold to AOL. Did that at school. This is what the future of wealth looks like. It tends to be fearless, inventive, and focused. And it's why when I was leaving school, if you looked at the sort of businesses that everybody wanted to join and they wanted to work with, and they're still very successful businesses, and for those of you that want to join with them, that's great. Those were, if you like, the commanding heights of employment in those early years. If you look at it today, this is what it looks like. And in fact, some of those names are starting to look a bit dog-eared and tired, right? You know, actually look at, I mean, we look at Facebook as this sort of like eternal part of our lives. It's 10 years ago, nobody even heard of it. 10 years ago, it was a way of geeks in Silicon Valley trying to meet women. I mean, that was how it was. And these businesses have burst onto the scene. And so when we talk about explosive growth, this is the world in which we're living. This is this fearless environment. And so to that degree, it's a new world. And I want to really tell you why. In the last Parliament, the last 5 years, there were 760,000 firms in this country that were created. Now, I want to put that into context. Within Europe, there are 25 million small businesses. 5 million of them are here in Britain. And of those 5 million, 760,000 of them were created in the last 5 years. Now, I'm not a mathematician, but I do know that that is important in a statistical sense, because this is where the future seeds of wealth are being created. It's a reason why when you look at the durability of the UK against its European neighbours, there's no surprise that there is some agility in the UK economy and that it is the 6th largest economy in the world, is because actually it's the entrepreneurs that are driving it. And it's predicted to be the largest in Europe by 2020. And so what I think is that it's an economy that increasingly shows signs of being ready for the action and the activity that's required. And when you meet the sort of entrepreneurs that I meet both in Silicon Valley or in London, in Shoreditch, or indeed in many towns and cities around the world, what you get is a sense of optimism about this changing world, right? You can see a lot of things that are bad about it, but you can also see what is changing it. And business is a big part of that change, because a lot of the entrepreneurs that we interviewed in the book see the future as simply limitless, that there is nothing you cannot achieve if business doesn't put its mind to it. So what does that mean? Living to 200 years? Business will solve that problem. Curing obesity? Business will solve that problem. Curing the problems of air travel, of climate change, of so many different parts of society's problems. Entrepreneurs see themselves as part of that higher purpose, solving the big defining challenges of the world in which we live. Now, perhaps that is wildly over-optimistic on behalf of the people that do it. But if you were to go out to Silicon Valley today, the one thing that you would find is hundreds of thousands of people with that same sense of limitless optimism about what it is that they can do. Disruption is the new normal. People don't like disruption. They don't like disruption in their careers. They don't like disruption in their lives. But that is what's happening, right? Disruption is happening in industries. It's happening in people's lives and their jobs. And that is going to accelerate. It's not going to decelerate in the lives that you guys will go out into. And pundits called, remember, it's amazing that we did a piece of work called Growth Britannia last year. And what we asked about was, did people have any sense that Britain was leaving the recession? For a large part of the entrepreneurial economy, they don't even remember we were in recession. What they're now talking about is the Great Recovery. And so what I think is that whereas the last 5 years were the startup parliament, they were the years where startups took off in a big way in this country, the next 5 years is going to be the growth parliament. It's going to be about, can Britain do it in a growth economy? Can Britain do it in a growth world? Because there's a very important statistic, or an important estimate, I think, that's worth saying here, which is that the S&P 500, which is the index of the world's most successful 500 companies, it estimates that 2/3 of the companies that will make up that index in 10 years' time have not even been created yet. They're walking around in your heads. You guys might set them up because of the connectivity. They're actually not even set up yet. So the 2/3 of the companies, 66% of the companies that will define our generation going forward, they're still an idea. And that is really why it's all to play for, because it levels the playing field in an immense way. Think about 5G that's coming through. All parts of the world get that in equal measure. If you look at the sort of uptake of technology in India and in Africa and so all parts of the developing world, it makes it such an exciting world to be a part of in terms of where the playing field has been leveled. And it's technology that's building that world beater of tomorrow. And Britain's turning out its fair share of those world beaters. I mean, it's interesting, they call them, those sort of companies are called the unicorns, and they are the billion-dollar startups, those companies that have emerged very, very quickly to be valued at that sort of level. And they're working into, or emerging into a world which is disruptive, changing, uncertain, and I'd argue amazing, because that amazing world gives us all a chance to do something. It makes it completely meritocratic in that sense. And of course, you come out into this world, this is a world where increasingly it's made for the young and talented to have a go. But to have it, you've got to have certain, I think, characteristics in this emerging world. Optimism, activism, a focus on impact, and entrepreneurship. I think those are, if you're looking for the DNA of success, increasingly you see a lot of young people that look at entrepreneurship as something that they really want to do. And so to that degree, they see life as a springboard actually to use school, to use university, to use colleges, not only to get that formal education, but that informal education. Because for everything that you get in a school like Millfield in terms of first-class education, a lot of you guys are going to do some amazing things in life. And whereas when I left in 1988, I mean, it was really hard to stay in touch, actually. I mean, one of the first things everybody did was they sort of, they fell out of contact. Today, with LinkedIn, with all sorts of social media tools, you can stay in touch for the rest of your lives in a way that preceding generations never had the opportunity to. So my world has become one of campaigning. A lot of what we are doing is taking these ideas in terms of entrepreneurs that want to change the world. And by the way, it's a very un-English thing to say, I want to change the world. I mean, most people that say that would blush terribly in terms of the sense of, well, really, would I? Well, no, not really. But actually, a lot of this sort of new emerging entrepreneurial talent sees that, what they're going to do in health or whatever it might be, that they will ultimately change the world for the people that they work with. So I've been lucky enough to set up a business of my own in 2010, Seven Hills, which is a campaigns business, and it's been an absolute thrill to do it. And what I think about is we had a certain amount of audacity. So my business partner and I, we decided we were going to be the Saatchis of our era. Now the Saatchis were a very famous advertising duo. They were well known for their glasses, so at least we had those. And they became one of the world's most successful advertising companies. Now, I can tell you that when there are just two of you and you're shopping on the IKEA in the North Circular Road for your furniture, and you're there saying, we are going to be the world beater in what we do, it feels like a long way to travel. But I will say, 6 years later, we've done very, very well in that respect, and that business has grown. A few other things that I'd mention. I founded an organisation called Startup Britain, which was there to celebrate the startup phase, the startup era, if you will, and to really accelerate the sort of performance culture in Britain, and really giving people encouragement to have a go. And that has been a really big part of the last 5 years, that startup culture. At the other end, I chair the entrepreneurs team at Coutts, so I get to see at a private bank level, what it means when you've had that success and you see certain characteristics in the people that you work with. So in terms of my own sort of life, I do a lot of interviewing. I've worked closely with Cameron. I've interviewed people like Jimmy Wales. Anybody know who Jimmy Wales is? Founder of Wikipedia. I get to sort of a really fantastic ability to observe how successful people behave and actually what is it that makes them tick. And I also do the Sky newspaper review with Margaret Mountford. Anybody remember her from The Apprentice? Well, they call it Madge and Mick. That's the two of us actually on a Sunday morning if you get a chance to watch it. So in terms of the business that I run, we talk about it being fast growth, campaigning, it's about communications. And we've got a good following, and we are currently, I will say this, we're the world's best corporate consultancy according to the Holmes report. And I think it's not just because of the clients that we work with, I think it's because of these things that we do. We run some big events, but we have focused very much on this book, on mission, and we see mission as the breakthrough. So I'm a PR man, I guess, in terms of the way that you would define it, but I think where it's going is that campaigning is the new category, because campaigning is basically all about the ability to define that purpose, take it to the next level. And in the book, we identified 3 new economies that have come out of recession, out of the sort of the 2008 financial crash. And we call them the carers, the sharers, and the darers. And the caring economy is basically the people like John Mackey from Whole Foods, or take an English version of John Mackey, Paul Lindley from Ella's Kitchen. These are the people that want to nurture you. They want to improve your body, your soul, your mind. The sharers are the sharing economy. Those are your Airbnbs. And what that means is that it's an economically unproductive thing to do for that seat to be vacant for 23 hours out of 24 in a given day. If I can share that with you and charge money for it, then it becomes the sharing economy. So all Airbnb is about turning your bedroom into an economic asset. And when you look at Joe Gebbia, he's the most unassuming guy. He didn't think he was going to set out to have one of the world's most successful businesses in that respect, but that's what he did. He was bankrupt. He needed to actually come up with an idea which was about making money. So he decided to rent out his bed. And then when he got somebody to come to it, he decided he wanted to show him his town, San Francisco. And then he decided he had some friends. And before you knew it, that social idea became something extraordinary. And then, of course, there are those that set out to basically rip up the rule book and change your world. And we call those the darers. And right now, the most interesting example of that is Uber, which is killing off taxi companies around the world. So the taxi drivers, black cab drivers hate Uber. Most people love it. And the reason why they love it is because it's built around the consumer, it's daring, it makes your life much more convenient. And as much as governments and all sorts of different things try to change it, that is what the daring economy is like. And they need your belief, because quite often these businesses start off very small. They are flooded with venture capital or shareholder investment, and they need people to believe ultimately what they might do, what they might become. And Uber is the absolute triumph over belief, the triumph with belief, if you like, in terms of what can be achieved. When we talked to them, a few just interesting things that they were saying. So Airbnb was talking about, they weren't selling accommodation, they were selling belonging. It was something tribal that actually we love being a part of, this ability to go and stay in each other's homes. Actually, it gives a much more intimate sense of visiting a city or doing things in a very different way. When we interviewed Uber, one of the things they want to do, it's an amazing objective. They want to take 1 million cars off the road of London. Probably 1 million, not of their own cars, but somebody else's cars. But the point being, I can tell you, as a regular traveller around London, that would make an enormous difference. That's a big mission. That's a quasi-political mission in terms of what that company is trying to do. And then, looking at somebody like Paul Lindley, effectively, this is about childhood diet, childhood obesity, actually curing some of those issues. And then you look at Mackey, who is probably the most political entrepreneur you could possibly meet. he's created this ideal called conscious capitalism. He wrote a book. I'd advise you to read it. It's a great thing on life. It's called Conscious Capitalism, Liberating the Heroic Spirit of Business. And actually it gives a great manual for the way that entrepreneurs are changing the world, but also the entrepreneur in you, because that doesn't mean about setting up a business necessarily. It could be about an entrepreneurial mindset. So let me tell you why this matters. And it matters because stories matter. Because mission is also about a narrative that's able to be communicated to you. A narrative which actually underpins everything that you do in life. Whether you're a person, anybody heard of Alan Sugar? Yeah, anybody like him? Anybody doesn't like him? If your hands, anybody met him? Right, no hands, right, half a hand, right, we'll take half a hand, that's it, right, okay, so you've met him, very unusual. But most people form an impression, a perception about him without having any idea of who he is. Most people have got a perception about brands, about companies, without ever even shopping with them or ever even meeting anyone from it. And that is the reputation that you carry with you. Now, Jim Collins wrote a book called Good to Great. And what he said was that basically good is all around us. Good is everywhere. And in many respects, good is the enemy of great, because great is something brilliant. So great is something remarkable. When I say remarkable, it means worthy of remark. What makes it remarkable? In this world, you've got to be remarkable. You've got to be worthy of remark because people will go elsewhere. I mean, this isn't a world where money still matters, where actually austerity is still at the heart of things, and actually your ability to stand out in this crowd becomes really important. It's one where money is wasted in a way that people don't really know and people still don't understand. So John Wanamaker, he said this in the 1920s, by the way, that half the money I spend on advertising is wasted. The trouble is, I don't know which half. And actually, this is a world where that money is being wasted in quite a catastrophic way. And in that catastrophe, businesses have really struggled. So Mike Tyson, who was the heavyweight champion of the world, he said they've all got a strategy until they get hit. Well, many of the world's largest corporations have got hit. Now look at them now. Look at them trying to reinterpret, recreate themselves around a sense of mission, a sense of purpose. McDonald's just in the weekend's papers, talking specifically about this issue, about the era of healthy living and how they can play a part of it. Because the fact is that the consumer has zoned out, and they've zoned out because human attention is in very short supply. There just isn't enough to go around, because as Uber gets more famous, guess what? McDonald's becomes less famous. Not only them, but look about all the other organizations, all those other brands that used to be the darlings of us, the consumers. And the reason why that is, of course, is because consumers are subject. They're bombarded to too much information in a given day. About 3,000 advertising messages a day for the average human being. That's what the University of San Diego estimates. Stories then have got to speak to you. That's what we think mission allows you to do. It gives you something to campaign with. And they've got to be simple, they've got to be memorable, they've got to be emotional, because the world is full of clutter. It is full of clutter. Things do not break out, things do not stand out. Recognize this. What's it saying to you? Try out the first word. Safety. Boring. Those are the two things that actually Volvo fights with. Apologies to all the Volvo drivers. I'm going to explain to you in a moment why that's the case. That's by design, not by default. What does that say to you? Original. Anything else? Fun.
Diverse.
Sorry? Diverse. Right. We're going to come back to that in a moment. These brands are speaking to you just by virtue of the logos that they put up. And what that allows you to do is, and I mean, Starbucks is a really good example of this, is that it can take a virtually worthless commodity, and if you can add a sense of mission or purpose or brand to it, you can become a $5 experience. In fact, it's more than that. I mean, they call it $5 in the States, but it's much more than that these days. And the reason why that is because they have created their sense of purpose around the third place. That if your first place is home, your second place is work, the third place for the tribe of people that like it is Starbucks. Now, let me tell you the magic, how this all works. So there was a guy called Desmond Morris. He wrote The Naked Ape. And in The Naked Ape, he basically identified what makes apes tick, and by extrapolation, what makes human beings tick. Now, there's a number of these things, which are roughly these: sex, prestige, health, curiosity, power, tribalism, parenthood, winning, and protection. Those are the things that make your brain tick. and we all think about all of them. Now here's the interesting thing. Doesn't that suddenly make sense? Doesn't it? Isn't that what it's all about, right? Isn't the reason why we were talking about Volvo as being safe or boring is because, it's your parents, right? It's a parenthood brand. This is about altruism. Is the Ferrari driver on the King's Road making a statement about automotive excellence, or is it about sex appeal and sort of, thundering red engines and all that stuff? Is the reason why you like Virgin because it's a curiosity brand? Because when Branson says that he will get to the heights of the planet or to the bottom of its oceans, we believe in that. We believe in a business. Virgin has got 400 companies in the group. Many of those have failed. Virgin Brides, that was a company. Virgin Cola, that was a company. They go out Virgin Cosmetics, Virgin Records. They don't exist anymore. Think of Marks and Spencer's trying to play that curiosity card. Power, we talked about Alan Sugar. Try Donald Trump. Anybody like him? Probably very few. Well, the reason why is because he's the ultimate power brand. And then ultimately, the problem why, whenever you sort of hear like British Gas going, we're fun, we're funky, well, actually you don't want that, do you? Because they're a protection brand. You want to know that when you switch the lights on, it works. And then Nike, really good example here, is that it can just have the tick. It doesn't even need words anymore. Because what you're buying is you're buying winning, you're buying performance. Because we're all going to be Serena Williams or Usain Bolt. Not really, but that's what we think we're buying. That's the dream we're buying. We're buying that sense of purpose out of it. So this is the world that you're entering into. So I would finish off with some final thoughts in terms of both mission and I guess in terms of thinking about the lives that you ultimately will lead in the working environment. There's a brilliant marketing writer called Seth Godin. He does a daily blog. Sign up to it. It's brilliant. He wrote a book called The Purple Cow. Read it. It's excellent. And what he talks about is why we lose attention. And the reason why he wrote The Purple Cow is because he's an American. He's from Chicago. And when he went to France, he took his family outside of Paris. And the thing that they noticed was the cows in the field. And he thought that's absurd because they're not like American cows, apparently. And after about 40 minutes, all the family were bored again. And then he thought, I'd have to make those cows purple for them to be interested, to actually awake their imagination in the product. And The Purple Cow is a very short book, and it's a really good book in terms of understanding about how you break through. And one of the things he said is that stories are like viruses, and they require people to act like sneezers. So one of the big problems is that every time a major corporation tries to relaunch itself with a big idea, if you don't have the sneezers, if you don't have the believers, if you don't have the people to take that story forward for you, it never breaks through, it doesn't work. Another great writer, Al Ries, he said that perception is everything. The only question is how to create a favourable perception in the consumer's mind. This is why mission has suddenly mattered so much. There's a brilliant article in the Financial Times last weekend which talked about the new Obamas. The idea that America's corporate leaders have become like mini Obamas in their own particular businesses. Now, they've not done this because they've suddenly had this sort of social conscience, if you like, that's sort of been completely sort of broken open by their own sense of what I want to do. They've done it because they see it's the future. They've done it because they see that we care, the consumer cares, and they have to respond to that. And it's been basically created by people like Steve Jobs. We talked about him as the campaigner 1.0, and he said something brilliant. He said, it's better to be a pirate than join the Navy, right? And I think that's an interesting thing to think about in your career in terms of the world in which you're going to go out into. And I think in terms of what Millfield gives you, I guess, in terms of that individuality. And Paris Hilton, I'd started with one very august Hilton, perhaps one that's slightly less august. She said that dress cute wherever you go, life is too short to blend in. Well, I think standing out is really important. And finally, Mark McCormack, who was the inspiration behind a movie called Jerry Maguire. I guess, actually, have any of you watched it? Only one person. There you go. It's a good bit of weekend viewing. It's a great movie. But he was an inspiration. Mark McCormack founded IMG, sports marketing agency, and his life was turned into a movie that Tom Cruise was in. Anyway, he said this. He said that all things being equal, people will buy from a friend. All things not being quite so equal, people will still buy from a friend. And this is why mission is really important, I think, in terms of what it allows you to do in explaining the world in which you live. And back to Apple, when we think about this book, and I'll finish here, we wrote it on the back of an amazing advert that Apple created in 1998, I think it was, called Think Different. And if you want to get a sense of what Mission is all about, this is the last sort of 60 seconds I'd show you in terms of who we've written about and why we've written it.
Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
Took us 75,000 words to say that. Thank you very much indeed. Great.
Well, thank you very much, Michael, and I hope that's inspired you to look at the rock star's choice, as you started saying there. And in John Mackey's words and Paris Hilton's words, life is too short. So have a think about that. And I've always thought that Millfield kind of favours the crazy ones slightly in your year groups. You know, they're not vilified; they're kind of admired in that secret way. So let's. This is where I get to sit down. And it's open to everybody here for some question and answers.
How did you get to the position to where you are now? How did you work your way up?
Well, I think Millfield gave me a really good start. I mean, so I was in a film called 3B8, which was not exactly for high achieving. In fact, I think it was basically the last refuge before you were. You'll remember it. I've got 3B10. I think it went up to 3B10. That's right. In those days, 3B10. Right. So I always thought of us as like the Dirty Dozen. So the Dirty Dozen is a movie where everybody gets killed, bar one person at the end. And in our instance, everybody got expelled. So there were about 2 people left that kind of made it through. And so I don't think what happened was I think Millfield got hold of something that was good in me, which was I could debate, I could talk about things. And so what I realized was that during my time here was that I was good on my feet, I was good at talking. And we actually went in the Observer Mace debating team with the school. I remember it was something that the school didn't do a lot of in those days. And all of a sudden we found ourselves in the semi-finals. And I remember we decided that we didn't fancy the debate title, so we said we're pulling out. And of course we hadn't then realised there was a guy called Mr. Rosser at those times. Is he still around? And he wasn't the greatest liberal, I think it's fair to say. And he called in these 4 people and he said, I hear you pulled out of the competition. And he said, and you've disgraced the school by doing it. And he said, we're not prepared to accept it. And so we were put right at that moment, and then I realised the importance of following through on your word. But I'll always remember the chit he wrote for me at the time, and it said, a debating emergency has arisen. These pupils are to be given the next 2 days off. And we handed these in to all the school teachers. So it was Mr. Thomas, and we were literally locked up in the then prefect's common room for 2 days working out this debate, which was about, and I always, it was something about could business run charities or something. And anyway, we lost the debate as it happens, but we did a really good job of it. And from that time onwards, I always had this great idea that I loved the communication side. So when I left university, I started working in politics. I had an interest in it from those early days, but I always fancied business more. But the more I've got into business, the more I've been able to mix the two, in the sense that I have a political appreciation in a public policy sense. So I don't really do things on a conservative Labour or Liberal Democrat basis, but I do like things that are on a policy level. So the startup arena, all the sort of enterprise and business side is exactly what I really enjoy doing. So I don't think there was any silver bullet answer, and I think if I was to try and make sense of what happened in the intervening years, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a repeatable career path, but I think that, Millfield gave me a great start.
Where do you aim in 10 years?
Well, I hope to be still alive. That will be a good start. I think we want to make Seven Hills the defining business in its sector in terms of what it does. We hope through this book that we've written that we will define a new category in the communication mix in terms of campaigning. We want to do important work. We want to do things that really do make a difference. And I think that the business will go forward in that respect. In 10 years' time, I'll be, God forbid, I'll be in my mid-50s. By that, it sort of goes by very, very quickly, is what I can tell you. And so I hope that we've continued the trajectory that we've started with what we've got. I don't really have a great answer, though, in terms of I want to be this person. But I must say, if the last 5 years are anything to go by, then I'm looking forward to the next 10.
It's a good question, though, because in 10 years, a lot of the startup businesses
That's
that you're
right.
talking about lose their way. Do you
Yeah.
think they may start with a mission of caring or sharing or daring. Do they lose their way slightly? Do they sell up and start again in a new form?
I think there is always. I think entrepreneurs often get exhausted. Entrepreneurs often get pushed out of the way in businesses that go to the next level, and you see those. I mean, the other thing is that the flip side of everything that I've told you tonight is, of course, is that there are a lot of business deaths every year. There are 220,000 businesses every year that fail, and they fail because they become exhausted, they lose their sense of purpose, they lose their drive, they lose their attention on cash or whatever it might be, but they actually go out of business. So I think, you have to be, business is tough. This is the thing I would say is that, a lot of these guys make it look easy, but the reality of it is that you have to have an always on mentality. It's never great fun being married to an entrepreneur, and my wife will tell you that. And the reason why is because you're always driven by what's happening next. And I think you're either the sort of person that really does, it's a very adrenaline-fueled existence, and you're either the sort of person that energizes you, and it actually sort of continues to energize you, so the sense of purpose stays there, or it defeats you. Now, what I would say is that some people have mastered it, and Branson is a good example of that. In essentially, there's a wonderful photograph of him when he was about 18. With his first business, and of course, you then look at him, and he didn't look. He's got better as he's aged. I'll give him that. And then there is the man that he ultimately became, and I think he has become this great sort of, if you like, standard bearer, torch bearer for what it means to be the purpose-driven entrepreneur. What I think is interesting is that we really don't know where this explosion in businesses is going to take us. We really don't know how many of those businesses aren't going to succeed. But what we do know is that this generation is being defined by the Mark Zuckerbergs and others who always believe in maintaining the startup culture at the heart of the business. And that's the big antidote to it. If you can maintain the startup culture in a business, you have a great chance of succeeding.
And how wonderful to be in that world, working with those startups. And the question that was about Seven Hills, do you get a lot of advice from those startup entrepreneurs who are a bit younger than you and I, who are still full of fresh ideas and still where you should be going?
Well, we've had a number of digital experts, and what I've realised is that it's probably kids that are 15, 16, 17 years old that know probably a lot more about algorithms and what's happening. What I would say is that in this next generation is that science, technology, engineering are going to be defining, maths will be defining. If you look at something like marketing, is that I was brought up in a generation where marketing was seen as an art. It will be about algorithms in the future. We've had many false starts in promising the technological age, the white heat of technological revolution, all this sort of stuff. I think what we are now approaching is the moment where technology is really taking hold. And actually what it means is that the importance of people have always said that technology would get rid of everybody's jobs. And in some industries, of course, that has happened. But part of the response has got to be about agility. It's got to be about the ability to reinvent. Because the one thing at this stage in our lives anyway, that machines can't do is creativity. And I think that kind of creative response to changing conditions is a really important part. But technology will become such a defining feature. I mean, we're never going to go back. I mean, for the phones that you all have in your pockets at the moment, those who hasn't got a smartphone? Well, the one right, they've got a BlackBerry. Right, okay. Well, the thing is, we didn't even have phones in 1980. I mean, I think they'd only just been invented. But this smartphone in your pocket is more powerful now than the White House technology was in the 70s, 80s, even the early 90s. And basically, street food sellers in India have got the same level of technological sort of exposure and experience as we have. This is the great leveler. I mean, we live in a little island like this where we just think it's all going to go on and it's going to carry on and we're all going to be wealthy and it's all going to be fine. That's not going to be the way the world goes. It's going to change so massively, and it's being driven by technology, and it's the entrepreneurs that are driving that technology, and that's the world we'll live in.
What is your advice for those not going to university?
Well, I don't think it matters. I mean, I think one of the great things about I do think it. Listen, I mean, I think there is. I went to university and I benefited from it. I'm really pleased I went. What I think is that I don't think that it needs to hold you back in the way that it has held past generations. But I think if you look at some of the most successful entrepreneurs in the country right now, they're not university educated people. What I would say is that there are a lot more university people that have gone into entrepreneurship, right? So over the last 10 years, that's been the great leveler. So I think the most important thing is that ideas and creativity are things that experience gives you as much as formal teaching. So I think you can look around the world and find a great idea and then you can run with it. The other thing is that what I will say about some people that don't go down the university route, and I'm thinking of a very specific person, is that I've got a friend who's in the movie business and he didn't go to university. And what he found was that in the 3 or 4 years that he was in the workplace was that his career just catapulted. Because what happens is that you have an initial objection from the employer or the investor that you're not a university educated person. But if you can show them that you've got the character and the right stuff, those sorts of obstacles don't need to remain in your way that long. However, what I would say is that it's a world where knowledge really matters, and that's the role of universities. What I would say is that universities have got to make sure that they're skilling up people with the right skills. And I have a real worry about universities equipping people for a century that no longer exists. And that actually the role of a lot of degrees is that it gives a level of certainty and understanding that has long since disappeared. And there's a great Ken Robinson TED talk about that, well worth watching.
There's a question right over here.
Clearly you have a strong interest in British startups. Which British startups do you most admire and why?
That's a good question. And actually, that's what John Mackey said to me when I didn't think he had an answer. But anyway, I think where I think right now the most exciting startups are coming out is in a sector called fintech. Have you all heard of fintech? So fintech is something you should look at because it's the marrying up of financial services, so old banks, with technology. So have you heard of things like RateSetter? And there's a whole sort of alternative finance providers, Market Invoice. There's many of these sorts of businesses where they're bringing together efficiencies out of financial services. So basically, you can make a lot of money out through technology. And what I think is that a lot of the new businesses that are breaking through right now in Britain are in the fintech sector. And I think that's where if you had money to invest and you were looking for a startup that was going to be really interesting, that would be one area. So technology is that. The other area is food, interestingly, is that I think food is going to be one of the big breakthroughs, and that's really as a consequence of having written the book, because a lot of food businesses behave like technology startups, you look at these breakthrough businesses and they are doing things which are truly extraordinary. So there's a business in the States called Hampton Creek, which is worth looking at because people like Zuckerberg and many of the other Silicon Valleys investors have invested in it. And what its basic mission is to make junk food healthy. And so what they've started doing is it's about hamburgers, it's about fried food, it's about all the stuff that we know we shouldn't eat. And the interesting thing is that big companies are currently trying to kill it. So they created eggless mayonnaise, and guess what? Unilever took them straight to court because they wanted to get rid of the business. And I think this is the sort of business that is disruptive. It's got a fantastic sense of purpose at the heart of it. People really like what they're trying to do. And so I think I'd look at food and tech, and within tech, I'd look at fintech as being where some of those future stars are in the next 1,000 days, but not much more than that.
Two questions, if I may.
Yeah.
First, what is the significance of Seven Hill? In other words, why did you choose that name?
Yeah.
But rather more importantly, why is it, given the excellence of the British education system, do you think that we have not so far seen a whole lot of path-breaking companies? I'm talking about the Airbnbs, the Ubers and so on. In other words, companies that could just as easily fundamentally have come out of Britain, given that you have the language, that you have the technology and so on. Why do you think that has not happened so far?
So I'll answer the second part first, if I may. So I think, I think what Britain has done in abundance is startups. What it hasn't done in abundance is scale-ups, and that, if you like, is the big challenge of the next 5 years. In European terms, it's been phenomenally successful, though, in creating these kind of new economy businesses. And I don't think it's just a UK challenge, because I think the comparison between the UK and the States is spurious in the sense that this is a tiny country in the scheme of things, which does punch massively above its weight and does turn out a lot of brilliant companies. But the States has got a most amazing entrepreneurial environment in terms of investment culture, in terms of liquidity, in terms of immediate market access. There are many things. And I think, when you talk about the American dream, it's often an entrepreneurial dream. If you talk about a British dream, I'm not sure entrepreneurial would be yet a defining part of it. I think there is also a sell-up culture. So I wrote an article about mansions and Maseratis a few weeks ago, which is that just when a lot of businesses get the sense that they could become a real breakthrough business, the entrepreneur says, you know what, I can get 50 million, I'll take it, I'll bank it, and I'll sell it to somebody else. And quite often, at the point of selling a company, something in that company dies. It's very rare that large companies can make a success of smaller acquisitions. The exception to that is in the world of IP and technology and engineering, where quite often large companies will buy a particular form of excellence to actually plug into what it is that they're doing. So you look at big data and you look at areas like advanced manufacturing and engineering, you see a lot of success of British companies. Look at Graphene out of the University of Manchester, look at some of these sort of firms that are coming up. And there was a piece of work done by a company called GP Bullhound, which talked about these unicorn businesses that I referred to, and it talked about the fact that Europe is starting to really accelerate on those. If you look at people like Skype, if you look at Spotify, these are not American businesses. These are European businesses, and the UK is the capital of Europe in terms of those businesses right now. And it's not, but the issue is that we've got to make that a UK-wide story as opposed to a London story. So London has suddenly got it. So if you look at the number one destination outside of the States right now, it's London. It's in a massive way. And I think that's because it's married the wealth of the city. Technology has come on stream as a sector. I mean, it's really interesting. We work with Tech City, which is the organisation that promotes technology in the Shoreditch area. Now, if you go back 5 years ago, everybody said Tech City is a joke. It's basically promoting a roundabout in central London, Old Street. Nobody says that anymore because it's the most significant hub of technology businesses outside of San Francisco. It's more successful than New York. It's more successful than most of the other cities. So I think that there is a lot to be optimistic about, and some of these breakthrough businesses will come from Britain. I think people have got to be really realistic, though, that this is not the States. This is a relatively small country that can do some extraordinary things and punch above its weight, but it's not going to necessarily deliver a load of those consumer-facing brands like Facebook and Google. The interesting, when you talk to somebody like Dr. Mike Lynch, who founded Autonomy, what he talks about is this kind of deep technology that Britain is absolutely brilliant at. So when you look at the rise of things like the Internet of Things and you look at where technology is taking you, British companies are going to be at the forefront of that. And I think that's where the best options are for growth and success. And as far as Seven Hills is concerned, I would love to tell you that it's about Rome and it's about Cicero. Far from it. It's about Sheffield, which is where I'm from, and it's built on 7 hills. And my business partner gave me the advice of we should call it after your home city, so hence 7 Hills.
What competition did 7 Hills have, and how did you overcome that competition?
So we're trying to create this category, which is a category of one, and the reason why we want to do that is because there are usually 2 things. There's a great book called Blue Ocean, and Blue Ocean strategy is where you want to head to if you're a business. And the reason why is this is because there are 2 oceans. There's red ocean and blue ocean. And red ocean is formed by blood, because it's when companies kill each other on price. They turn themselves into a commodity. They can't differentiate. They can't be different. And a red ocean sector right now is the public relations sector, because technology is killing off all the things that used to be important in terms of what it could say it could do. So you talk about monitoring what it is the media says. Well, an app can do that now. You talk about all the things that used to be differentiated and value adding. That's a red ocean debate. So a lot of those businesses are getting killed off and they're dying. What we believe is that a blue ocean is where you have less competition. And in that ocean, you have the chance to be the best. You have the chance to be defining. You have the chance to be the category creator. So what we believe is that campaigning is going to be what CEOs want increasingly out of their communication side. You know, very, very few of the CEOs that we met would come to a company like ours and say, can you write me another press release? But what they will say is, I want to be the person that cured childhood obesity for kids in Britain. And to do that is no longer about just issuing press releases or getting media coverage. It's about a whole range of different things, and a whole set of levers that you have to pull to actually get out there and campaign. And the thing that we observed in the book was that a lot of these entrepreneurs, a lot of these business leaders, and it's not just the entrepreneurs, look at Paul Pullman actually at Unilever, is that he is much more of a kind of political style CEO because they've got purpose. Now the issue is that when you look at public relations, is that it's a game which is all about reputation and how you manage it and how you enhance it. Yet you'd rarely go to a PR agency if you were really serious about your reputation. You'd go to it as a commodity to actually get some press cuttings or to get some sort of media engagement. So we've tried to recreate the category around this campaigning side. However, when we set off, I mean, everybody was after us. I mean, we threw a lot into our launch and we threw pretty much half of our money into our launch party. I mean, that was because we wanted to make an impact and a difference, to show that we weren't some puny, weak startup, but actually we were there to make a difference. But in those early days, you're competing on price, you're competing on so many different things. And I think what you're always trying to do is push on through so that you become that business that can do something completely different to your competitors. We still get a lot of competitors, but they rarely can do the things we do because of the focus that we bring to the service we provide.
I think it's a very appealing world for a lot of Millfield pupils, the campaigning world.
Yeah.
And I guess what a lot of these guys are thinking is, you know, what do you look for in a good, if you're looking to take on a trainee or a graduate, you know, what kind of personal characteristics do you look for in a young person?
Well, we have hired from Millfield actually. George is working with us, and what I think is I talked about that kind of DNA of success earlier, and so I think that we look for people that are fundamentally optimistic. that have got an interest in the world, that have got a real interest in the world in terms of not just being told to do it because it's their job, but can actually come and talk to you about what's just happened in the general election, or actually what's happening within a corporation, or those sorts of things. I think it's people that want to make impact. I mean, there are certain people that just come through the door and there is a burning intensity to what it is they want to do, and they tell you as the employer what it is that they're going to do with their careers and their lives, and you just think, take me with you, and that is what you're looking for. What you're not looking for is kind of wallflowers. You're not looking for people that are not going to sort of have a sense of what impact they can have. I think what I would say is that in sectors like ours is that there's a huge level of interest in it, because it's one of those, it's coming out of these sort of recent years in terms of being a very new economy choice. And it takes those skills. And the other thing, as I say, is that increasingly we're looking at science backgrounds at the moment in terms of things that it will help us to do going forward.
Yeah, are there any golden rules to become an entrepreneur that you would recommend?
The best one I had was do it with other people's money. When I started all of this, I had a genuine belief, a strongly held belief that entrepreneurs were born, not made, and I was totally wrong about this, right? And the argument goes something like this: is that if you give somebody 10,000 hours violin practice, then actually they're probably going to be able to play a violin in a reasonably decent way. And I think it's about attitude, because there are so many people that have become commentators on entrepreneurs, so many people that think they know about entrepreneurs, and I call them the faux-preneurs, because they're not really at the heart of it, and they don't really get it. And I think that's why I enjoy interviewing entrepreneurs a lot, because in my own small way I'm going through a lot of the things that they will go through in building a business. I mean, most entrepreneurs are fueled by a fear of failure, no matter how big they get. They're always running from it, and anybody and this whole debate is about we must have a more accepting society about failure, and accepting culture on failure. Let me tell you, the most intolerant people on failure are entrepreneurs themselves, because it's on their own terms. They don't believe they failed until they've told you they failed. Many people may say you lost all that money, but in their view, that's just a setback. That's not real. The other thing is that they're fantastic sort of creators of opportunity. And so Stephen Hawking at Google Zeitgeist this week, he said that that man created fire, and when he created fire, he started burning down buildings, and he lost control of it. So someone invented the fire extinguisher, and that was your entrepreneur, I think, because the entrepreneur spots opportunity in everything. So when we get worried about data and our inability to look after it because of the internet, cybercrime, all those things are going to deliver the next generation of entrepreneurs, because somebody's going to say cybersecurity is big. By the way, I should have added that to the list of big ones, because something like cybersecurity and your ability to protect your identity online is a commercial opportunity as well as a social risk, and it'll be an entrepreneur that spots that opportunity. We're long gone from the days where government could sort these problems out. I mean, Google's new offices, it isn't Google's, Apple's new offices are bigger than the Pentagon. I mean, it's a huge, great big circular building that they've built, because these corporations have become, if you like, the sort of creators of societies, or the solvers of many of society's problems. And I think it starts with that initial entrepreneur zeal. There's an amazing video on YouTube, which is the eulogy given at Steve Jobs' wake by the engineer, who's called Johnny Ives. And if you're going to watch one thing from tonight, watch it. Because if you want to know what makes an entrepreneur tick, watch that eulogy, watch that story of Steve Jobs' life. It's about 4 minutes. It'll be the 4 minutes that change your life. And that tells you the character of the entrepreneur.
How would you like to see business education develop?
I think more entrepreneurs have got to get involved in it. And I think that it's wrong when all you hear are employers complaining about they don't make kids the same as my era, which is, by the way, what every generation has said forever and ever. And I think that there are a load of informal skills that young people pick up that are phenomenally useful to business, but they can fall outside of the formal education sort of arena. And Telefonica did a really interesting survey where they looked at unemployed young people and the value of their skill, potential value of their skills to the UK economy because of social media and all sorts of other things. And it was a very considerable amount. It's about £6 billion in sort of a gap of skills that could be used. So this is one of the reasons why I've done the work with the Duke of York on the Digital Enterprise Awards, which is about how do you monetize the idea that's in your head, and it's becoming a venture fund, and it's a really interesting thing. The other side of it is that I think educators have come to the conclusion that a lot of formal training does not necessarily give you everything you need for life, and that actually employers know that when they're just looking at a strictly academic CV, is that they don't necessarily get everything they need to know about the character of a person. So character is another big thing in employing people. So as of this year, there's going to be an enterprise passport that's created for people that are studying in secondary education. So that enterprise passport will have all of your informal skills. So you might have done work experience at Facebook, you might have done all sorts of different things, and that will travel with you, and it will build as a digital record of your life story that you can take to interviews, and actually it can help you with your own story. It will help you stand out if you haven't been at university. It will help you actually sort of codify and bring it together. The other thing is that there's a commitment to bring a mentor, a business mentor into every school in Britain, and I think that's just the start. I mean, I think that is there has to be a more business-friendly, business understanding sort of attitude in schools, because at the moment it's tiny. At the moment, all of these schemes, you look at a scheme like Tenor, which is the one everybody talks about, where they'll give you £10 and see what it is you can do with it, because there's so much to play for. So on the startup loans, I mean, these are young people that were given under £5,000 mostly. You can get a lot more now, but in the first generation, they were all £5,000 loans. There are over 20 of those businesses that have got turnovers now between £1 and £10 million. I think that's extraordinary. And I think that's something that educators need to revel in and think that actually this is the sort of world that you're unleashing young people into, and it's about having an understanding of that potential and how you galvanise it and how you spot it. And there are some schools that are great and really get it, and there are some schools that don't. And it goes on to university. Last thing I say is this on this, is that I think you've got to get young people earlier. It's, quite often it's the university that prepares you for business. I think this could be 6, 7, 8 years old when people are being told about the value of things, business, etc.
Great. Well, I think that's given us all a real challenge to be the entrepreneur, not the faux-preneur. And so thanks very much to Michael Hayman. Thank you. Gabby, our head girl, has got a small token of appreciation, which is a homemade Millfield product.
Thank you very much. Very good of you.
And guys,
thank you. Play with my daughter tomorrow.
And on the way out, guys, we've got a list here for anybody who'd like to sign up for an advance copy of Michael's book. So I'll leave that by the door. But once again, thanks very much to Michael Hayman.